like that.
Week, and the guy
But
forgot.
usually there's more books.
Well, we Good evening. The hour being after 7:30. It's actually 6:45 because we changed our time, and it's after 6:45. We all made it on time, thank God, except our colleague Jen Gayotitz, who will be joining us a little later. She is currently driving around for Eversource, identifying down lines in the city of Brockton. So she's getting here as fast as she can. I now call the October 28th, 2021 school committee meeting to order at 6:45. Our first order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. Flag is behind me. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, everyone. Our second order of business is our high school student update. This evening we have Ms. Grace Ryan and Mr. Colin Mahoney to give us an update. Please, take it away.
Good evening, I'm Grace and I'm a junior. Shadowing me tonight is sophomore Colin Mahoney. School was canceled yesterday due to power lines and trees down around the high school. Believe it or not, the first term is already coming to a close on November 5th, so students are preparing for term tests or other assignments in their classes. Study interventions have become very useful for students as they have ramped up over the past few weeks. Students can schedule to make up an assessment or get extra help from either their teacher, another teacher, or a National Honor Society member during their study blocks. As always, any student can also utilize their teachers after school. Fall sports are wrapping up with playoffs to begin in early November. Teams continue to work hard to make the most of the remainder of their seasons. Winter sports are beginning to hold meetings to determine interest and plan for tryouts after Thanksgiving. Congrats to all new members of the WHS speech and debate team who participated in a novice tournament virtually last Saturday, where veteran members judged and helped out. Many clubs have Halloween-related events this week. UNICEF Club had a successful trunk or treat last Sunday with many children from the community participating. Best Buddies is hosting a Monster Bash Halloween party on Saturday with games and treats. Student Council also has a candy drive planned for this Saturday to drop off candy to families in town. Student Council organized a cornhole tournament last Friday after school with proceeds going to the Jimmy Fund. It was a huge hit. This week, Student Council is hosting a Wall of Hope fundraiser where students can donate or buy a ribbon to raise money for breast cancer research. Lastly, Walpole families can now sign up for fall yard cleanup on November 6th and 7th to support Student Council. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Questions or comments from the committee? I do have one. Now that we're fast approaching November and this is our second year of COVID education, I know you just gave us a lot of really exciting student activities as well. Do you feel like you're getting closer to normalcy and just in a kind of wider way? What's the student experience like? I know you've been around a few years now as a junior, but.
Definitely. You seem to forget that we even wear masks anymore, and we're trying to plan the pep rally right now for Student Council, so we hope that will be more normal and get back to normal activities.
Excellent. Thank you. Further questions or comments from the committee? Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great to see you.
Our next order of business is under new business, our English Language Arts update. This evening, we have Department Head Ms. Lauren Culleton and our reading curriculum coordinator, Ms. Shannon Finley. Please come on down to the very far away desk to give your presentation.
The computer, too.
Or the
If you want to control your slide.
please. There's a lot of chairs. Pick a chair.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm Shannon Finley. I'm the K-5 ELA curriculum coordinator. This is my 4th year in Walpole, so thank you for inviting me. Just to sort of reflect on last year a little bit, a major goal was to launch the units of study in reading K-5 in order to have a standards-based literacy curriculum that progressed from kindergarten to 5th grade. So our first step was, in order to launch that, we purchased the units of study in reading, which are the core instructional materials for the teachers. We created book rooms to support the units of study. The primary student material is authentic text, so we've spent the last 2 years investing in authentic text, both fiction and nonfiction, transcending text complexity, diversity, ranges of genre and format. We've continued our professional development partnership with Claire Landrigan. Last year, she worked remotely with us, creating professional development videos, as well as streaming into classrooms. Oh, sure. Thanks. I feel like professional. She would stream into classrooms. She would co-teach lessons, model lessons virtually, which was just an interesting way to kind of think about professional development and keep that momentum going, even though we weren't in person. And personally, I continue to coach and collaborate with teachers. This year, finally back in person. I did do some in person last year, but I created a lot of instructional videos last year, as well as I did get into classrooms last year, but now back into the classrooms, working both with teachers in grade level team meetings, professional development workshops, but also in their classrooms with students, which I think is the best way to deliver professional development. And then also I work very closely with the literacy specialists in each building, coaching them and working with them in both student interventions as well as most effective practices in supporting teachers. And then finally, one of the main things that I worked on this summer and then launched this year was a K-5 scope and sequence, so that all of us could be in the same realm in terms of units of study. And there is a live link here if you want to take a peek at that, or it's not probably in your it's not in your handouts. Would it be helpful to just see what that looks like?
Yeah.
So this is the landing page. Again, it's just trying to, one of the big things we learned last year was making ease of access for teachers #1 priority. Everything in one spot instead of tracing things through email or trying to find a document. So this, we didn't have a literacy scope and sequence, so this has kind of been in the works since I started. And I can just show you one grade level. We'll just take a look at grade 1, for example. The units of study are broken down into primary 4 main units, 2 narrative, 2 nonfiction. And so when you're teaching narrative writing, you're teaching narrative reading, and vice versa. So this is just an example of grade 1, so you can see how we're laying it out, giving teachers flexibility because it is a responsive curriculum, meaning you're reacting to what your students are telling you that they need instead of just plugging away day by day, but this at least, again, gives a ballpark for lining up professional development, for collaboration, when everybody's on the same page. So you can see we're right now launching into word detectives in first grade, which is a major decoding unit for them, as well as writing. Our writing is how-to writing, so it's instructional, teaching people how to do different things. And we're also, even though I'm not necessarily social studies, we are looking to connect the social studies standards as well, especially when we're teaching informational reading and writing. How can we integrate content as well into the units of study? And then another big goal was really assessing and revising our early literacy instruction, primarily K through 2, to best reflect the brain research behind how the brain learns to read, as well as the science of reading. So there were 2 major summer R&Ds this summer that worked on that. The first one was to reflect and revise on foundations. This is our phonics program for K1 and 2. We were anticipating integrating parts of that into grade 3 this year, but materials were extremely hard to get, so that is on the agenda for the coming year. But it was our 3rd year for kindergarten and first grade, and anytime you implement a curriculum, it's good to just, all right, we've done this for 3 years, let's pause, let's see what's working, what's not working. And overall, it's working well in terms of direct instruction in phonics. But we did make some tweaks to just the scope and sequence, some of the pacing, and things like that. That was a team of kindergarten, first, and second grade teachers, as well as some literacy specialists. And then we also met to read and do some research around the most effective practices in teaching high-frequency words, sometimes known as sight words, really digging into the research behind the best way to teach all students those words, and we did end up making some revisions to our instructional practice based on the research. Typically, it was taught through memorization, and the most current brain research is showing that that's not necessarily the most effective way. We don't memorize words as whole units, so we've adjusted our practice to that. We've also purchased additional decodable text to be used in Reader's Workshop. We always used decodable text in K1 and 2, but they've changed tremendously over the last 5 years, and so we've added that to our instructional model. And then we've also implemented, last year we decided to implement Iready, which is a phonemic awareness curriculum. Again, as we looked at foundations and we looked at the units of study, phonemic awareness seemed to be an area in which we weren't doing a lot of direct, explicit instruction. So again, that we wanted to make sure that was really solid, especially in our kindergarten and first grade classrooms. And so we launched that. That is now being implemented in all of our K and 1 classrooms this year. And then new for this year, we did have our training last June, but we are implementing Curriculum Associates Iready, which is a literacy diagnostic assessment for kindergarten through 5th grade. And so what that consists of, it's an online diagnostic assessment. It consistently measures the 5 domains of literacy, meaning phonemic awareness, phonics, high-frequency words, comprehension in both literature and nonfiction. And it's an adaptive assessment given 3 times a year to 1st through 5th grade, twice a year to kindergarten. Adaptive meaning as students are answering questions proficiently, the test adjusts and the questions get a little bit harder, and vice versa. If the questions are becoming too challenging, the test will adapt to accommodate that for students. There are also additional offline tasks which are administered to students who shows any sign of reading challenges on the initial diagnostic, as well as additional dyslexia screening offline tasks that will be administered to students. We also have received professional development through Iready, first in June as a more launching, what is Iready, here's how you're gonna assign the assessment, and then more recently for 1st through 5th grade in terms of now we have the data, looking at the data and making instructional decisions based on the data. Kindergarten, their assessment window opens on Monday, and so their professional development will follow probably the beginning of December. And then we did, because of the implementation of Iready, make revisions to our currently literacy assessment calendar, being mindful of over-assessing students and really being mindful of that. And then we've been, the last 2 weeks, really in terms of literacy, having grade level team meetings specifically based on analyzing the data and planning next steps for instruction, both whole class, for individual students, and small groups of students as well. The literacy specialists and the principals have really been leading those meetings. And then just in terms of next steps, we are continuing our collaboration with Claire Landrigan this year, primarily with just myself and the literacy specialists, to continue to educate ourselves on best literacy practices and best supporting teachers in Tier 1 literacy practices. Grade level team meetings and data meetings, and job embedded professional development to support implementation of both the new curriculum and the workshop model. That's primarily myself leading those, as I mentioned before, coaching in classrooms, grade level team meetings, additional workshops. I just mentioned having the Iready and using that for data analysis, continued collaboration with administration, definitely, and then just starting to look ahead to 2022, 2023, hard to believe. Just thinking again about book purchases. Are there any areas of literacy that we're not addressing that we need to address, and starting those conversations now. So I have a little video to show. I'm hoping that may not be able to hear it, but we'll give it a go and see what happens.
Yeah, just put that down, but you want to turn the computer around for sure.
Turn this around.
Yeah, because we're having issues with the volume out of the speakers here, so.
I like reading in 4th grade because we have a lot of good buddies to read with, and the books, and we have a great selection of books that are hard.
What do you two like about Reader's Workshop?
I like to read. I like reading my favorite books. I like reading in 4th grade because the books are much harder, and I like trying to read hard books. I like reading in 3rd grade because it calms me down. I am Max, and I'm in kindergarten, and I like to read the Beetle book.
What do you like about Reader's Workshop?
I like that we get to read a lot of books. I like reading in 4th grade because there's a lot of choices, and a lot of the books are adventure and like historical fiction.
I like reading in 2nd grade because I like seeing if there's new books in the back, like in Dogman. I'm on 4th grade. Like that. But usually there's more books.
My name is Teddy, and I'm in kindergarten, and I like reading Santos.
Hi, I'm Lojin Kashida. I'm in grade 5th, and I love reading because of reading independently, especially the book Front Desk.
My name is Brooke, and I like reading stories in kindergarten. Hi, I'm Jake. Hi, I'm Simon, and we're both in kindergarten. And I like the Billy Goat's Gruff book. And I like the Beetle book.
Hi, I'm Naomi Steven, and I'm in grade 5. I love reading independently and talking about books.
My name is Eloise, and I like reading old favorites. I like reading in 3rd grade because sometimes I can read harder books.
I like reading in 2nd grade because when you come across a hard word, you look at it and think of it for a second, and then you tap it out, and then you get it.
I like reading in 4th grade because every book has different adventures and struggles, but at the end, everyone has a good day and a good time doing whatever they want.
Questions from the committee for Ms. Finley? Sean and then Mrs. Geller.
Thank you for the excellent presentation. It was super informative, and I love the video. It was great to hear the kids articulate everything from strategies to how they're developing a love for reading, and that is so important. And my question was just on Iready. Are you just using it for an adaptive assessment or like progress monitoring throughout the year as well?
There's no.
Just use the mic so that people at home can hear you.
They don't have we don't have the option to do additional online assessments, but we are using, as I mentioned, the offline tasks, as well as one of the components that teachers are loving is after the diagnostic. You basically, when you look at the report, there's like what the student can do and then where to go next with the student, as well as some instructional materials to support that, not instructional materials meaning on the computer, but actually what a teacher could then pull a small group and work with, which teachers are really loving that part.
Yeah. Is that new information this year compared to what the teachers had in previous years to inform instruction?
I mean, we had sort of a homegrown literacy assessment calendar, but I think having the subjectivity out of it is kind of nice. Having the computer-based, just one shot. Again, there's pluses and minuses of a computer-based assessment as well, for sure, which, we're looking at the speed that students took the assessment and triangulating data in terms of like, oh, they did really well here, but they're not doing so well, in class, and not, taking it for what it's worth, I should say, and then really thinking about, okay, is there an area that we want to probe a little bit deeper, and then, again, using that information to determine both Tier 1, Tier 2 classroom interventions.
Oh, thank you.
Mrs. Galvin.
I have two questions. First of all, it's great, and it's great to have you here, and it's great to see the kids. I know a while ago there was an effort to try to have every elementary grade be able to schedule reading and math early in the day when the kids are pretty much fresh. Are we able to do that still?
Primarily, which runs into its own challenges as we sort of shift to having the literacy specialists support teachers more in classrooms. We are finding that a challenge this year, specifically if, for example, if all grade 1 and grade K through 2, say, for example, has their literacy block in the morning. That's probably not a good example because K through 2 should have the literacy block in the morning, but say K through 5 and the literacy specialist is trying to support multiple grade levels, they're not able to get into the classroom as much. So those are definitely things to consider. I definitely think K through 2 for literacy instruction in the morning, and then maybe thinking if we could be flexible with 3, 4, and 5, or maybe even just 4 and 5 in the afternoon to allow more push in literacy support for both the teacher as well as the students in the classroom. So scheduling is always just such a challenge.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. But you do have 2 literacy specialists per elementary school.
Exactly.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Which is great.
Yep.
Can you give us a little bit of a sense of what those people's day would look like?
Sure. So their day consists primarily of supporting teachers in terms of launching the units of study, as well as supporting children both inside the classroom and outside the classroom in determined targeted interventions.
So when you say they're launching the units of study, does that mean they're working with the teachers before the teachers teach the unit, or does that mean that they're teaching the unit to the students?
Sometimes
initially?
both. So they may
Okay.
meet and plan and co-plan a lesson, and then they may model the lesson for the teacher and then intervene with students in the classroom. The teacher may teach the lesson, and then they both work with small groups of students in the classroom. It really depends on, again, this is really new for this position in terms of a more coaching-ish type role. And working with adults can be very different than working with children. So it's definitely a work in progress, and that's why we're working closely with Claire Landrigan to support that piece of the literacy specialist role.
Janet, can you explain how the workshop model allows for the specialist to push in and support different groups a little bit?
Sure. So ideally, the workshop structure is, let's just say you have a 60-minute block of time. There's a 10 to 15-minute direct instruction in which the teacher is explicitly teaching a strategy, a skill, a concept. And then the rest of the time, so say, my math may not be that great, say there's 30 minutes left. The students are working either independently, as the students mentioned, in books, they're working in small groups, they're working in partners, they're working with a teacher. So that block of time is then structured based on what the students need. And then the lesson, just great lesson design is wrapped up all together. So say for the last 5 minutes, that could look a lot of different ways to reinstate the teaching point or the objective, to share some student work, depending on the lesson. The closure it could be a little bit different. And that's the structure for both reading and writing.
So that's what allows for the push-in for the reading specialists to come in and work with the differentiated groups. And some of those groups might be dictated by the unit, or it could be dictated by some of the data from Iready that the teachers use to break students up by need, differentiate in that capacity. And so the group might get a little bit more support with a reading specialist doing more of the inclusion push-in model.
Exactly. So like, for example, I've been doing week-longs at different schools. So in Fisher last week in kindergarten, for example, we had a group of students that we were working on concepts of print, really thinking about the difference between letters and words, and in a small group, and then connecting that to actual books. And then in another group, we were working on phonemic awareness, just really like thinking about, we had a mystery bag and would pull out an object, and they had to think about what's the first sound you hear in this object, how many syllables or beats do you hear? And then we had another group that cycled through in which they were actually building and reading words. So that's just one example of what that time might look like.
Thank you.
Further questions? Ms. Denicio.
Thank you for the presentation. I have the privilege of seeing some of the elementary level writing products come home, and I have to say that I'm always amazed at the quality of work that I'm getting from my very, very young elementary school students, and I wish there's a way for sort of the wider community maybe to see some of those writing products, because I think most people would really be astounded at what some of our youngest students are capable of producing, kind of under the conditions that we've created. What I really like about the approach that we're using is the emphasis is on helping the students to get their ideas out and their creativity out first, and not to be stifled by mechanics in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And then, they work out the mechanics a little bit later, and a lot of that comes from their kind of the reader's workshop aspect too, right? Like,
Exactly.
they see what writers do, they have conversations about what good writers do, and then they model that for themselves. And I have a student who used to crumble on the floor when I used to make him write at home during that lovely period of time, and told me yesterday he loves writing. So he's really, made a big transition, and kudos to his teachers that have really, and the literacy specialists that have really, made that happen. But I think the model's working very, very well just from what I can see.
Thank you.
And I think, the more we can promote the writing products, I think the better, so that the community really understands like what a tremendous impact the programs are having on our kids.
Good. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. I think the first meeting I presented, I think I had some writers that came and they presented writing. So that's a great thing to, maybe I could come back.
Definitely.
Excellent.
Just one quick
Dr.
thing.
Goff.
Just one quick, I was at, earlier this week, at a Iready meeting, and with one of the elementary grades, and it was just great to see, how well they're embracing it, and, how amazing it is, the way it separates into those domains you were talking about, right? And grouping the students, and what they could do to meet the students where they're at, and the students that needed the challenge, what they could do with those students. And then also how it flags, so if students just finished it in 5 minutes, then they can have a conversation with the students. And then the second piece is that just sitting in and watching your literacy meetings, Bill and I think the other week we were at one of those meetings, and just even, not only talking about the literacy piece, but just tips in order to maximize, the teacher's instructional time in the classrooms, and giving them those tips so they're not standing and delivering. They're having those workshops, but then they're also maximizing their instruction with their openers. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Further questions from the committee? Seeing none, would you like to move on to middle school update? Ms. Culleton.
Mike, to you. If I use this
So Lauren Culleton, ELA Coordinator, 6 through 12. So I'll give us a little update on the middle school and the high school. Last time I was here, we talked about the middle school audit that we conducted right before the pandemic started. In fact, we got the results virtually. Yes. So I think we talked about the audit and the recommendation. So I was going to talk a little bit about what we have done since then. Last year, Bill and I tried to find some professional PD to bring in, and we had absolutely no luck finding something that fit what we were going to do. So Mrs. Kerr, who's a high school English teacher, she and I worked on creating some professional development that we're implementing with the middle school. So I'll walk you through that and talk about the role that we're going to use Mrs. Kerr for in the second half of the semester. So based on the feedback that we got from the audit, Mrs. Kerr and I looked at what the main suggestions were, what the main areas were. And we focused on student engagement, differentiation, approaches to writing, and close reading strategies. The audit recommended that, suggested that our teachers don't do enough differentiation within class. Also noticed that our above level and our on level classes had very different experiences. Based on their recommendation and because of the pandemic last year, we ended up not leveling classes last year, and we continued that practice this year. And a lot of the strategies and professional development that Mrs. Kerr and I are doing is geared toward that. We created this is just the medium that we're using with the teachers. We created this Google Classroom just where we could put all of our resources. We used 4 main texts. We used Teach Like a Champion 2.0. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of Teach Like a Champion, Doug Lemov. Laura Kerr worked with this company in this program when she was doing some curriculum writing. She took a 2-year leave of absence 5-6 years ago, and she did some extensive curriculum writing. So she used this program quite a bit. We also used Dr. Catlin Tucker's blended learning and differentiation. She's got a lot of techniques. We used the book in question, which is Dr. Carol Jago talks about writing, especially at reading and writing, especially at the middle school and high school level, and also this text, Why Students Don't Like School. Within that, we have, moved all sorts of pop-ups. We created a bunch of, we organized teaching strategies and little mini lessons and little mini units that I'm working with the teachers in the first half of the semester. We're using mostly curriculum meeting time once a month, some half-day time, and when possible, if I can get down to the schools, we'll use some of their PLC time. And we just do little learning strategies, little teaching strategies, and they have reflections that we use after that, and then I come into their room. I'm trying to act more of a teaching coach this semester, and I try to make an effort to get down to the middle schools for a couple of hours each week, each middle school, and try and give teachers a more feedback, more of a mentorship role. We also have structuring your lessons, and then later on, after engaging your students, we're going to talk about writing and reading. But we figured we needed to start with that piece of engaging students, differentiation, sort of getting all kids on board before we got to the writing and the reading aspect of it. When I heard that Shannon was putting together a video with kids reading out loud, I felt a little threatened. So I threw in a gratuitous picture of Mrs. Kerr's daughter. Because, cute kids. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the role that Mrs. Kerr is going to have. She's out on maternity leave right now, and that's Gwendolyn, so you can meet Gwendolyn. Mrs. Kerr has been at the high school for, I think, about 13 years. She has, every year that she's been there, she's worked with freshmen. She's worked with lots of other levels, too. She's also been working with the AP. And she has done some extensive curriculum development. And so when she comes back in the spring in January, the second half of the year, she's going to work, she's a 0.6 teacher, so she works 3.5 hours a day, but she's going to work in the middle school. She's going to go between the 2 middle schools working as a coach with those teachers. She, more than anybody, knows what the 9th grade students need, what those upcoming 8th grade students need. She and I have talked a lot about it. We've talked a lot about it with the other 9th grade teachers. The things that the 9th grade teachers say that they really want focused on in the middle school is students are still engaged. You know, seeing those 5th graders and 4th graders talk about how much they love reading, something happens between there and 9th grade. Because when they come in 9th grade, some of them still like to read, but a lot of them will not pick up a book by choice if given the choice. They don't love it anymore. So we're looking at ways at that whole getting students engaged and getting them involved in the classroom so they keep that love of learning, so they'll come to the high school more engaged. They're willing to take academic chances. You know, they're not just kind of compliant. They're really engaged in the class. We're looking for students who can work independently and collaboratively. As far as the skills, I know that there's been some concern with we have unleveled classes, that those students won't be prepared in the 9th grade. I disagree absolutely. I mean, it's a skills-based class. We're really doing a lot of the same skills that they've been doing in 5th grade. We just kind of do them a little bit more deeply each year. And every year, even in 12th grade, I have 12th graders now, we start with the same basics. We start with writing a topic sentence. They just get more sophisticated every year. So having an unleveled class won't, I don't believe, affect the skills. What I think it's going to do is raise everybody up, raise the kids who kind of are struggling, who are a little bit less involved, and really kind of bring everybody, the rigor of everybody up. So that's what we're doing in the middle school. Do you want to stop and talk middle school, or do you want me to move to high school?
Let's. Ms. Gautitz and then
Yeah.
myself.
So something I hear as I walk around talking to parents is this concern that we're not challenging the students who may be, you know, at the higher level. And I can tell you this is not well received. So
I know.
I have concerns myself. I don't have a student at that level yet, but, you know, it seems to me we're challenging our students in math by having leveled math, and then we're not doing the same for students who may be really good at, you know, ELA. So that concerns me. I know we benchmarked, and I asked a lot of questions about this, so I was willing to give it a chance, but I do still have that concern that we're challenging those students at the higher end.
I understand. And I guess I would ask that you're patient with us for a year. You know, it's new for teachers. It's new for everybody. And we are going to talk about differentiation. One of the things that we would like to move from is a reliance on whole text reads, you know, the whole class reading the same book at the same time. It's difficult to make that shift suddenly and do all your text that way. So we're introducing that slowly, more student text, more student independence, maybe taking a shorter, smaller text as the whole class read, and then have more student choice with appropriate challenge for each student. So, you know, I think that when you're talking about strong middle school students, the students who like to read are still going to be able to read a lot and read the stuff that they like. But as far as a challenging text, you know, a text, for example, like Lord of the Flies, and some 8th grade students could read it and follow it for plot. But there's so many levels to it that even the most advanced 8th grade students are not going to get everything out of that text that's in there that a high school kid would get. So a lot of it is sort of readiness. You know, there's only so much complexity you can give to the middle school students that they're going to understand. They're going to understand the surface of it. Some of them are starting to read beyond plot, but most of them aren't. Most of them still need that guidance before that. So, you know, there's only so much challenge. There are only so many challenging books you can give in the middle school as a whole class read anyway. So I think that, you know, try and be patient with us, and just as we've seen at the middle school, it takes a couple of years to shift to practice and to bring in some new strategies and have people get comfortable with it, and we really start to see some results. I would also say that, you know, what we were doing before, having the leveled classes, our MCAS scores weren't showing that that was really necessarily successful. So, you know, we definitely have some students who are working at the top and who are scoring high, but our middle and our low classes scores were kind of stagnant. So I think if we continue to look at that and see how things go, I'm confident that with the differentiation and with student choice and trying to get more kids reading more things, we're not going to see a dip of the students at the top. What we're going to see is more kids rise up.
If I may, I think that point is well taken, and we're probably going to want to hear from you and invite you back at the end of this year, as well as I'm excited when Mrs. Kerr returns, that she's doing that kind of move between 8th and 9th, and obviously next year as well, the proof will be in the pudding as far as how our 9th graders do after this unleveled year. So we'll obviously kind of look at this in a wider scope, but I guess I would just ask if you could kind of clarify and in a greater way color what success of this shift would look like, and how we would present that to the community, that the going from a level to an unleveled. I understand that our peers do it in this fashion, but like what is success demonstrably to of this shift, like, and how will we talk about that? And
well, I think that one marker that we've used are the MCAS scores, and I think that our middle school MCAS scores have not been where we want them to be. And I think that is definitely one marker we can look at. I think other than that, that idea of student engagement, but then also seeing how in 9th grade, how next year, this year's 8th grade students do in the 9th grade. When the first time they have leveled classes. I think that would really be the true test.
right, no, I agree. Further questions or comments from the committee? Ms. Zeditio, Ms. Sarek, Mrs. Gallivan?
Mr. Buckley stole my first question, but my second question was going to be, do you foresee any shifts needing to be made in 9th grade ELA classes to not accommodate, because I'm not talking necessarily about changing the level of instruction or the level of the class, but in terms of the way the class is structured, given what students will now be used to having gone through the middle school, in terms of maybe there is more choice, maybe the students are working in groups around particular texts more often. Do you foresee that impacting what ELA classes look like at the 9th grade level?
That's an interesting question, and I'll confess that I don't think I have given that a lot of thought, but I also think that as you were asking the question, I was thinking, I think we already do more of that at the high school level. There are more opportunities for some choice. We do still do some whole text novel, but then a lot of times supplementary work, there's often a lot of choice, but.
So would it be fair to say then that the shift is going to make the middle school classes in some ways more closely mirror what a 9th grade class already looks like?
Again, I hadn't really thought of that before, but as you're saying that, that makes sense to me. I hadn't thought of it in those terms before.
Thank you.
Ms. Sarek?
So sort of piggybacking on what Ms. Denicio said, having a junior who is one of those struggling readers, I think the opportunities in the high school to have sort of that mix of text within a classroom is really helpful. And I think seeing it more in the middle school would be great, so that you're not sort of in the low reading class, even though your intelligence might not be sort of where the text is. So I think it's great that that's coming down a little bit more. And then I wanted to ask about sort of bridging between elementary and middle school. There's a lot that's being done that really sort of supports, dyslexic students, and sort of maybe catch some of those kids earlier, and then with foundations and some of those programs, give them the right supports. So how do you think that might then impact what happens from a support, or maybe you need less support in the middle school, or, how do those programs building then maybe help the middle school?
We have talked a lot about that, and we've talked about getting our 6th grade teachers to meet with the 5th grade teachers, and Shannon's been joining our curriculum meetings. And I think that's going to be helpful, even having, and the 6th grade teachers have already started to noticing it, that there's more there's more commonality among the students coming from different schools.
Good.
And they used to say that, there wasn't.
Oh, I heard it, yeah.
So the sixth grade teachers are already starting to notice that. So I imagine that, those bridges and those transitions are only going to get smoother as we get better at this.
Great.
And if I could add, the idea is with more proactive screening from K all the way to 5, we'll do a much more proactive job and a better job at supporting our students early.
Right.
Early support and early intervention is crucial to the success of a reader.
100%.
Yeah,
Yep.
so we really believe building upon that capacity early will improve not just our elementary, but certainly all the way to 12th grade, but especially, I think, in middle school.
Thank you.
Mrs. Gallivan?
Couple of things. First of all, I have tremendous faith in Lauren because I know her as a teacher, and I think it's brilliant to bring Ms. Kerr into the mix because there is that gap between middle school and high school, and she has experience with that. So, I think that is a really, really good idea. A couple of things. I was glad to hear you say that you also think that middle school is just a key time to catch kids and keep their interest alive in their passions. Every once in a while, we get invited to be a guest reader usually it's the elementary schools. And I often just like to chat with the kids and, ask them, how many kids love to read? And of course, there's a whole bunch, their hands are right up. And then there's a bunch that aren't. And I say to them, maybe you just haven't found the thing that you love to read yet. And my husband hated reading until he started reading history books. And it's not for everybody, but he just loved that. So, to try to help a kid find their passion during middle school, you're right, they're still really sort of ripe for that type of energy. So I think that's super important. I think that all of us up here have dealt with the fact that the community is looking for benchmarks and measurements and that sort of stuff. And so I do think that that's an important piece. And I'm glad to hear you're being honest about the MCAS scores can be better. So, and I don't expect that it's going to turn around in a year, but I do think that it is sort of an ongoing conversation that we're going to need to have. And I guess a couple of things. What I would ask about that is when you do your analysis, look at how we compare to the towns nearby, because that's what the community does. And that's just real life. I also think that we need more than just standardized tests. And, some of my colleagues up here are gonna be like, she's saying, because I always bring up the standardized tests because that's what's out there in the community. Like, that's the measurement that people can see. And especially in your department, you've got great journalism. You've got like the best film thing going anywhere. So I think that we don't want to diminish the fact that those things are good, but I do think we do have to pay attention to how our visible benchmark standards compare to towns nearby. And in my opinion, we need to get more kids in the high end as well. It's everywhere. But if, I think that it's important for us to trust you, important for us to trust the superintendent and the assistant superintendent who are saying, you know what, this is gonna pay off in the end. But just so that you know.
I absolutely know, and I know that change is difficult. And again, I ask that you give us, a little time and some patience. We've had a couple year transition at the elementary school. It's going to take us a little while to retrain teachers. It's something that's difficult. I remember, years ago saying, if someone wanted me to teach an unleveled class, you'd have to teach me how to do it. And so that's what we're trying to do, is give teachers those tools. And it is a tough transition. But, we're taking the steps that we think we need to do. And I agree, Nancy, that I think that Laura Kerr is a really good person. First of all, she's an outstanding teacher, and she really knows what the ninth grade students at the high school experience, so.
Well, and even just you're saying that you're making the effort to be in there as a coach is, I think that's been a missing piece at the middle school.
No, it absolutely has, yes.
So, yeah, that's great, thank you.
Mr. Ahern?
Yeah, just to piggyback on some of those things. So I have a ninth grader this year who just transitioned up. And, I would say there's not a lot of similarities between her classes last year and this year, at least to this point. They're handed novels. There's not a lot of differentiation that I can see. There's not a lot of choice involved. It's it's more like a high school class, but it's a shock to an eighth grader who is starting to see some of those things peek in. For a parent of a child who absolutely loves to read, like the joy level is definitely sinking at a rapid pace.
I'm sorry to hear that.
It's just harder. Like there is more expectation about what to get out of the text, but things like the close reading, emphasizing that in the middle school will certainly help when they get to high school. And that kind of transitions. I don't know that I have one question. I think maybe towards the end. This is just kind of comments and feedback. But I'm a proponent of unleveling. I think that's fantastic for all students. There's a lot of peer mentoring that can go on and collaboration. But you made a comment a couple times that the teachers are learning this, and you pair that with a statement that give us a year. I think ideally we would give you a couple of years to figure this out. Because as the students transition up from 5th grade, they're coming into middle school with a whole new tool set. And as the teaching strategies get implemented across the grades, our learners are going to look a lot different, hopefully, and our teachers are going to look a lot different, because these things are not always easy, especially the differentiation part when we get up and you're working in a class and you have different groups growing and making sure, it's easy to default back to everybody doing the same thing or asking the same questions, but being able to know what's going on and probe each of the groups at their levels, that's a difficult thing to do. But I think, maybe a couple of years, like I don't feel like, we can say to the community, at the end of this year, we'll make an informed decision. I feel like we should really.
I agree. I think it's going to be a bit of a transition. I think that I'm looking at this year as a learning year. And then hopefully next year, teachers are more confident and starting to put into practice. Sorry, I don't know what I just did.
All good.
Oh.
It's my final question. I'm not sure if you mentioned PD, but this is a lot for the middle school ELA teachers. What does that look like for them specific to this topic of, differentiation, kind of changing instruction?
Well, so that's a lot of the PD. So Mrs. Kerr and I worked a lot over the summer, and we gathered a lot of different resources. And so I've started working with the teachers, going through some of the resources, doing some readings, doing some, getting some feedback, having them practice some stuff. Again, me coming into their classroom and seeing how it looks. I'm sorry, now I'm distracted because I'm trying to look at my Sorry, one thing at a time.
Yeah.
And so that's the PD primarily.
Is it, the Google Classroom was a fantastic tool, and being a technology person, I love that. There's a lot of resources for the teachers right at their fingertips. Does the PD look like you doing a lot of coaching and support, or?
Yes. So what we've been doing is, I'll introduce them to, for instance, I'm going to take one of the, so when we've been talking about essentially setting high expectations and trying to get students more involved, all of your students more involved. And so we, what I'll do is I'll share with them an excerpt from one of the texts. We'll read it together, we'll talk about it together, we'll talk about what it looks like in your class, we'll talk about any problems that they might have. This is a strategy that this Doug Lemov calls right is right. And so we'll talk about what that looks like, how we get students involved, and then we have a little video that they can watch of one teacher using it in action. And then when I've come into their class, I look for, and I've said to them, you don't have to use those exact strategies, but I'm looking for that kind of outcome. How, are more kids raising their hands? One of the tendencies that I've seen teachers do is a student gives a right answer or a partially right answer, and then the teacher fills in, rather than pushing the students, getting the students to fill in. So that's a particular strategy that I've been working with teachers on, is, having them not say, oh, great job, and then filling in, but saying, okay, Sean, I like that, what can you add to it? Or, can somebody else add to what Sean said? So getting them to fill in the work. So that's one particular strategy that we've been working on. So that's sort of the format that we've been doing with the PD.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
This is great. And just again, just as you clicked on that, that's a powerful tool. Like
It
that's great work. Thank you for
Thank
spending
you.
the time to do that.
Thank you. As we've started, I think we were a little ambitious, and I don't think we're going to get through all that we've done, so I'm going to have to kind of pick and choose the ones that we get to.
Right.
Further questions from the Committee on Middle School? Seeing none, we can flow into high school now.
All right. The high school, I'm going to just quickly look at some MCAS results. I have promised Mr. Hahn that we're not going to talk about it deeply because he's going to in 2 weeks. And then I was just going to talk a little bit about PLC work and some of the curriculum outlines that we've been working on. This is just from 2018, the legacy test. We have traditionally at the high school, our grade 10 MCAS scores have been very strong. I would say that, 98, I think I was doing the math earlier, about 98% here score advanced and proficient. So we've done fairly well in the MCAS. If you look at the 2019-2021 scores, I would look at them and say there wasn't a big drop-off. There doesn't seem to be on the surface a lot of learning loss after the past year and a half, at least as compared to the state. We're still diving into the scores, we're still looking at things more closely, but when I look at the surface of it, that's what I see. I do see that we have, a little bit more, a slightly higher percentage of students who did not meet expectations. And again, we'll have to look at why that is, and I think that, we had students, I'm sure all over the state did, but students who were not as engaged as they have been. Remote learning was very difficult for some kids. Some kids were doing the Edgenuity, and I know that that was a very difficult program for a lot of kids. And so, as we go through the MCAS scores more deeply, I'd like to see if we can, figure out what exactly, pinpoint what was going on there. This just looks at, again, the district to the state for the 2021. Our PLC work, I would say that one of the real positives that came out of last year is that we really, our PLCs worked as teams much more closely than they have ever. There was more time for teachers to work together, more dedicated time, and it was a lifesaver for teachers. And I think it changed their practice, and I don't think we'll be going back. I think that teachers really saw how beneficial it was to work together as a team. So this year, one of the things that we've been looking at specifically, and I asked our PLC teachers to report back to me, was specifically, what is something that your PLC team has done in consideration of the accelerated roadmap? Like, what is something your team especially is doing to target those students, to assess where students are, to see where students, if there are gaps, and how we can move everybody forward while also filling in those gaps. So I have some results, some feedback from what the PLC teams have done. I will say that we don't have report back from all of the teams. Unfortunately, this year we don't have that same dedicated time. Some of our PLCs have, coincidentally, in their schedule, they happen to have the same free time, so they work together. I'm definitely making an effort to give them our department time or early release time if they have. But last year when we had it every Wednesday, that Wednesday time especially, it was really very beneficial. But so the freshman honors team, who, working with Mrs. Murray and Miss Linden, Mrs. Murray has been the freshman honors teacher for the past couple of years. This year, I made more of an effort to have every PLC have at least one team member, so you don't have any solo people. I think the only solo right now is AP Lit. There's only one teacher teaching AP Lit. Everybody else has somebody that they can work with and strategize with and co-plan with. So one thing that Mrs. Murray and Mrs. Linden reported back, that their team works together on all lessons and assessments. They do common grading to ensure that their expectations are aligned and that students all have, in all sections, have similar experiences with the common learning expectations, their goals, and their objectives. The two of them are teaching pretty much lockstep, making sure that those freshman honors kids, regardless of which class, they have the same experiences. They're using the same rubrics. They do some common grading to make sure that their expectations are the same. They are still working on updating their curriculum map. Our sophomore CP1 team this year, we've added Mrs. Williamson. She's our long-term sub who's filling in for Mrs. Kerr. And we also have Ms. Gould and Mr. Solomons, who are both experienced teachers. They've both been teaching the sophomore CP1 for a long time. And it's been great for Ms. Williamson to step into a team that's so established and works really well together. They've been working on sharing their writing lessons and their strategies. They also use common rubrics when grading writing assessments. They also make time to do some common grading. And so when we do common grading, what we'll do is each teacher will take a batch of their writing assignment and grade some until they find, well, this is what I look at as a B and this is an A, and they'll bring them together and sort of establish benchmarks and talk about what an A looks like, what a B looks like, and also really more importantly talk about the kind of feedback they're giving. One of the traps that a lot of English teachers fall into is being an editor, and we're really trying to move away from that and giving feedback and not just correcting, and so that students, when they revise, it's more than just going and putting capital letters. It's really developing ideas more fully or finding more appropriate quotes. And that's where having those benchmarks is helpful to teachers so that they're all working with the same skills. Our junior CP2 team is Ms. Giblin, Ms. Linden, and Mr. Allen. That team has created a universal language around the key foundational writing skills. The language has been and will be integrated to the rubrics for short and long essays. They posted some of their benchmarks. I was in Mr. Allen's, one of his junior CP2 classes last week, and he was doing something I had never seen, and it was phenomenal, and I'm going to try and figure out a way to steal it. He had created a PowerPoint, and then each student had their own. So he was going through the steps of what to do, and then students were able to model it right then in real time. And he could, on his screen, he could see all the work that they were doing. So it was just a way of chunking it so students could work on one skill at a time, but they also had it all in one place, and he could give students immediate feedback. And I asked him if he had shared that practice with the other junior 2 teachers, and he had, so they were all doing that. And I also then asked him if he would share it at our next department meeting with the other teachers, because it was really remarkable watching him. The senior CP2 team is myself and Ms. McMinimum, and we also, our senior CP2 class, are all aligned. I might have added some slides since I shared that with you. I apologize. Our senior CP2 class are aligned. One of the things that Mr. Ahern mentioned is that, I talked about before, is that some students have lost the love of learning, especially by the time, love of reading. And one of the things that Ms. McMenamum and I are really working on is trying to get these kids who are often reluctant readers to read again. And we are doing an independent reading that we try to do at least once a week. We try to do that, whether we give them a period of independent reading, we give them a list of sources, and it's nonfiction, and I say, I don't care. If you want to read about the Patriots, read an article about the Patriots. But then we have a feedback form that they fill out what they learned, things that they're thinking about, a way to track vocabulary, their own vocabulary. I then challenge them to use the vocabulary in their essays and their writing. We call it reading the world around you. We just really want them to, start looking at the world around them and their place in it. I challenge some of them to read things beyond about the Patriots, but I imagine I'll have more luck at that after football season's over. I did post a student sample of a writing, and again, this is a class, one of our, these are kids who typically don't really love to read or write. They had to find, I gave them a list of articles of things to read, of personal narratives, and this narrative, How to Grieve for a Very Good Dog. Several students wrote and chose to read, and this student wrote his analytical essay. They had to find whatever narrative essay they read, they had to find both the commonality and the diversity within the article. So they had to talk about how that person experienced things that everybody experiences, and yet how their experiences were different from anybody else's. So again, this is one of our students, this is one of our seniors in the CP2 class, and what it shows me is that, and there he's using some of his stretch vocabulary words. They had to highlight their stretch vocabulary words. It shows me that they're ready for college, that it's only October and we have a few months. But, they did this independently. Now, this was several drafts, this isn't the first draft, and I gave them feedback along the way. But this was independent. This was not me selecting the article. I gave them resources to select articles from. I didn't read the article to them. I didn't read the article with them. They read the articles on their own. And then they, using a series of prompts, wrote their essays. So that is, oh, wait a minute. Then I had, just was going to show you briefly the curriculum outlines. We were working to update our curriculum outlines so that they all look similar. And this is just our sophomore CP1 again, and it shows some of the core texts that people use, as well as some of the supplemental ones that teachers have choice in using, and these are always updated. We use these curriculum overviews as a guide, but we encourage teachers to bring things in as they need by and as they come up with them. So, and that is my update on the high school. I'm sure you have questions?
Questions from the committee? Mrs. Gallivan?
I would just say, I liked what you were just talking about especially for the juniors and seniors, to try to make it practical. Because, I think the ability to speak and to write persuasively, for example, is just something that you could talk to kids about, and to say, it doesn't matter, where you're going to end up career-wise, job, you're going to want to be able to make your point and be heard. And these are skills that, regardless of how how sure you are of what your future is going to look like, it's a good skill to have. So I think I like that idea of being practical and sort of helping them to think down the road. I think that's a really good idea.
I think we're having success.
I bet you are.
Further questions or comments on the committee? Ms. Denizio?
First, just a comment. I was just trying to look at the list of readings on.
Oh, I'm
the
sorry. Do you want me to
sophomore.
go back to one of them?
No, it's okay.
Oh.
I only meant to say that it looked like a really comprehensive or sort of broad list of texts and authors. I saw some sort of old classics that probably most of us read in high school, but I also saw some much newer texts, and I saw what appeared to be a diverse group of authors.
We're trying. We make strides. We're often limited by budget. We can't every year just buy all new texts. And when you bring in a new text, even if you've read it before, you're never quite sure how it's going to go over. So, we try to dip our toe in so that we don't end up full of bookshelves of books that we don't use, or we used once and then we don't use again. But we are definitely trying to diversify our texts. I would say that one of our challenges that we've found in that has been brought to our attention, in fact, I don't know if any of you received the News Searchlight, the student newspaper. One of our students, I think they just printed it today. I just got a copy on my desk today. One of our students wrote an article. I'm referencing what used to be the Rebellion, now it's the Searchlight. Wrote an article critiquing our lack of diversity and commenting on even on our diversity. It's very narrow. The diverse books we have present a very narrow view. And that's something I'm very aware of, and trying to find appropriate texts to broaden the experience for all of our students.
I think that progress is important, and kudos to that student for expressing that opinion, and maybe there are students who could provide additional feedback and kind of flesh out that concern more. I think it's always great to hear from them, and I think that diversifying the reading list is part of how you recapture that love of learning for many students too, right? Like if they see a title that grabs their attention, or an author's name that, looks interesting or different to them or connects to them in some way, that's sometimes how you hook, students who otherwise, wouldn't be as tuned in to what you're talking about in class. A question that I had was, a topic of conversation for a little bit of time has been, how do we ensure equitable access to honors and AP level classes for all of the students? There's been some talk in the past that teachers approach the recommendation process differently, and that a student's chance of getting recommended might hinge more than we would like on whatever teacher they happen to have in, let's say, 9th or 10th grade. So I'm curious if any PLC or department time has been given over, or if there are plans to devote any time to maybe standardizing the recommendation process, or taking another look at the recommendation process and making sure that, each student has the same opportunity to reach the highest level class that they possibly can.
That's actually something that we've discussed as department heads with Mr. Imbush here, and it is something that we have talked about. Speaking from my perspective, I think that we have a lot of students who move up successfully in English. Some go through the waiver process, some go with the teacher recommendation. Some try it and it isn't a successful move. I know I've signed several blue sheets this week of students who were like, this is too much. And I think that the other thing I want to keep in mind, last week had a student who came to me who wanted to move out of the honors into a level 1. And in my conversation with her, she was in 6 other honors, and she just wanted that balance in her life, and I absolutely agree. Even though her teacher said, I believe this person can be successful in the honors, I want to look at, well, sometimes at what cost.
For sure.
So I appreciate your comment, and yes, it's an ongoing conversation that we have, and we will continue to have, and I think that we're going to have it at a building-wide level also.
Great.
So yes.
Thank you.
Further questions, Mr. Breen?
I would add something I learned from Mr. Imbush years ago, that there's a birth order element as well, in terms of, if you have an older child that's in a CP1 class, the likelihood of a younger sibling getting an override into honors is there's a greater likelihood, seems to me. So that's something to be aware of as well, that in sort of standardizing and being aware of who's the oldest kid in the family, whose parents might not be advocating for them to be in an honors class. And it's not that they belong there, but a little extra attention to see if maybe some of those kids do.
Can I add one piece as well? It's not necessarily specifically to English, it's a little bit broader, but our equity task force will do an institutional self-evaluation that will look at access to our honors and AP courses. That will be really important. That will be done this year. We'll share that out when that comes. And then the second thing, and I think it's important to mention because it's related to our conversation, one of the things that came out, not just in our audit, but in most empirical literature, is that if you want to limit access, then you really don't want to sort that early on. So one of our actually decisions to get rid of leveling at the middle school is because when you start to identify that early, you really start to put kids in lanes and limit access at a very early age. So I just want to make that connection.
Further questions from Ms. Collin? Seeing none, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thanks, Laurie.
We'll see you a little later in the year. Moving on to old business, if the chair would have unanimous consent to bundle COVID update under the superintendent's report.
Kathy's not here.
Since
I'll be
Kathy's not here,
reporting that
excellent.
anyways.
So we'll then move on to Walpole High School's Wednesday intervention schedule update. Dr. Goff and Principal Imbush will give us an update about Wednesday afternoons at the high school.
Evening.
Good evening.
Hi.
I know that this has come up in the past, this alternative Wednesday schedule. Coming out of the summer after, knowing that we were coming out of the pandemic, anecdotally, I felt we needed some time. That was not scheduled class time. And so that's where my original thought of the Wednesday schedule came out of. However, I knew we would need time to analyze where the kids were and see what kind of learning gaps there were that we were dealing with. And so, when I was discussing this with Bridget and Bill and, the department chairs, the decision was made, we weren't ready to necessarily dive into this Wednesday schedule where we kind of ended classes a little earlier until we could really put our finger on how much it was going to benefit the kids. Now that we're well into it and we have started our interventions and they are going phenomenally well, I now know exactly what we need, and it is this shaving off a little bit of time from each Wednesday's class to create a little time at the end of the day where we can do several things. First of all, I would say the plan will be at the first half of that hour will be devoted a priority to teachers helping students. Now, it might be that students will spend a full hour or even more with teachers, and some teachers have expressed their need to spend more time than that with teachers. But the priority is going to be like a student would spend time after school with a teacher. It'll be exactly like that, except that the buses will not be leaving, practices will not be starting, clubs will not be starting, parents will not necessarily be there to pick up kids, and there will be nothing standing in the way of a child getting extra help with the teacher. After that time, PLC time will be also given over to teachers, and I think, as you heard from Lauren, PLC time has become extremely important at the high school, and we're lucky that we had 3 early release days this year so far that I was able to devote a lot of that time to the teachers' PLC time. But a regular PLC time is critical, and so if we can give teachers that time, they can work until 2:30, which is the end of the contract time, with each other to do all of the things that Lauren just expressed that they were working on together. That will be time well spent for the teachers as well. As I was working with some of the teachers in PLCs recently, I went into the physics first, which is the freshmen, and they were expressing how there was such learning gaps, that they were basically saying, is there any time that we can get small groups together, okay? Because I've got a group of kids who they badly need to get this learning gap filled. right? And interventions work to a certain extent, but interventions are individual students working with individual teachers during their study hall. Only about 80% will say of our kids in the high school have a study hall in the first semester. So you got kids with no study halls. So they have no option to get into the interventions. So their only option is to work after school. Now, working after school might be fine, but ninth graders often take a bus. The kids are trying to involve themselves in clubs and activities and sports, and this will be a guaranteed time for students to be able to work either in groups. And my PLC for physics, for example, they said, we know exactly what we're going to do with that hour. Kevin is going to teach this group of students this concept that they're missing, and Sam Fallon, will be teaching this group and it could be not all of my kids, but all the kids in the ninth grade physics who need that gap filled. So it's a perfect opportunity for us to do that, to say these kids from these 5 different classes need to learn this concept that they're missing from 8th grade, and we'll be able to pool them together, and there's no excuses, no sports, no buses, no nothing. So it's I think, the best scenario for us to fill these learning gaps. Other things that we can use this time for would be extra class time enrichment, for example, AP classes, if they need to do a little extra time. Even some of the elective courses like film, kids could possibly utilize the time to do that extra bit when it's coming to the critical test or film festival in this case. They'll have that time to work together. Guidance would love the time to work on guidance seminars. They do that during the day, but there's always kids who miss a seminar, and they're always trying to find a time to make up those seminars. This would be a perfect time for guidance to make up that work with the kids. Class assemblies, special presentations. We're always doing something for the kids, like we'll bring in a group to do the yellow dress or something like that. And we're pulling them out of classes in order to make that happen. And what I'm always trying to balance, is it worth pulling them out of class to make this happen? This is a perfect opportunity to say, okay, we have a presentation for the juniors. Juniors, you're all in for that hour at 11 o'clock. And you're going to get this presentation. Now no classes get disrupted, and we're able to also look after the social emotional side of what the kids were missing from the last 2 years. There'll be kids who don't need to work with teachers necessarily, but they have to get a bus. So what do they do for the hour? Well, we'll have study halls that we'll be able to set up where the ESPs, we've got plenty of ESPs who will be able to work with them and maybe do some extra homework help or whatever it might be for that time that they're in there. So all in all, it's even more important now than it was, I think, in September when I conceived of this idea of the Wednesday afternoon. I now know exactly what it would be used for, and the teachers are crying out for it. They've been asking me for a few weeks, and I've worked with Dr. Goff and Mr. Hahn to see, is there a way we can make this happen? And we finally kind of put together what this would look like. And I would love to start this immediately. I think now is the time that we need to fill these learning gaps, and if we don't, I was going to wait until next year. At one point I said, maybe we wait until next year and we try and implement it then. I can't wait. I'm not willing to wait to fill learning gaps that I know that these kids have from 18 months of the pandemic. So I feel very passionate about it, and I'd love to get your support in this. The big question always is, well, if my child doesn't have to stay, if he's got all A's and he's got AP and honors classes, and he's got a car because he's a senior. Can he go home? You know, and I would say maybe the benefit for that child who's got 5 hours of homework to do because they're in all honors and AP classes is to go home and is to get started and is to, you know, because I'll talk to these kids sometimes and they'll tell me that they're up until all hours doing 5 hours of homework. And, you know, we're trying to get that balance, but maybe there is a benefit to some of those kids going home at that time. But the priority obviously is going to be trying to fill these learning gaps and making really good use of this time. So I don't know if you have questions outside of what I've tried to describe.
Did you say it was 1 hour?
Yeah, so I've got 6 classes a day. I shave 10 minutes off each class, that gives me 1 hour. So essentially, instead of finishing at 2:05, we finish at 1 or 1:05, and the buses will still come at the regular time. We won't change those.
Mr. Hearn.
And just to follow up on the time question, I couldn't tell if you were alluding to like that hour being an actual split or like what the setup of the hour was, or were you just saying that there's multiple things that could happen with that hour?
There's multiple things that could happen with the hour, but my directive to the teachers, because what I don't want is teachers saying, okay, it's 1 o'clock, let's all get together and do PLC work now. And then there's kids walking around the hall who need help that can't maybe. So the priority is going to be you will spend the first half hour being available to students. And as I said, some teachers have indicated to me that, no, I don't need a half hour, I need a full hour with these students because I know what I'm going to need to do with them. So it's not going to be the same for every teacher. Some teachers will spend time, I mean, even now, I know when I walk around the school at the end of the day, some teachers are always with students and some teachers don't necessarily have students. My phys ed teachers might not have students coming looking for extra help, but my math teachers certainly do. So there's a difference in across the school in how they will use this time. But the priority has got to be from my point to the teachers that they have to work with students for at least that first half hour.
Further questions, Ms. Denise and Mrs. Gallivan.
What would the communication structure be around making sure that every student is accounted for and where they're supposed to be? So in other words, how do we know, okay, you students are in physics group 1 for this hour this week, and you have to go to guidance seminar, and you have permission to go home. How does that all get squared away week to week to week?
Yeah, well, what I will do is I'll have the teachers log who they're working at and what they're working with the students on. This, I don't want to whitewash this and say that this is like what some schools would call an X block, or like the middle schools would call
Extensions.
Yeah.
Extensions.
It's not that, okay? And it's not going to be a situation where I'm going to be able to tell you where every student is. Okay, this is going to be as needed time for students to either get the extra help that they feel that they need, or for teachers to direct students to extra help that they feel that those kids need in order to get these kids up to speed and up to grade level.
So those students will be assigned, the teachers can assign students.
Right.
I guess my concern would be, okay, let's say I'm in 9th grade, I'm in honors classes, I have straight A's, I have no need to stay for anything that I've missed or anything that I'm behind on. I just want to walk across the street to my house. I can do that? I can just leave at 1 o'clock or whatever time?
Yes.
And what if my friend wants to come with me and no teacher assigned my friend to anything? They're able to do that as well?
Yes.
So I worry a little bit about that dynamic. The liability of that, I guess. Conceivably a parent could not know if their child is still in the school building or not.
Mm-hmm.
And if there were a fire drill or the, you know, at 1:30, and we're not quite sure who we
Well, I
need to
mean,
account for?
even now, I mean, our policy since 2-3 years ago, since, you know, we with study halls, for example, I mean, all my students at this point can come in late or leave early when they have a study hall last block. So even right now, when a student has that study hall, they do have that ability to leave. They do have to sign out, but they do have the ability to go. You know, it could be that there are students who will leave, who don't get assigned to by a teacher, or who feel like they don't need to, but I think that has got to be the communication that I have with the parents, to make sure that they understand that this is the structure of it. It won't work if I have to, this is the idea of trying to get all of the kids into an activity for that hour, whatever that activity might be, will not allow enough teachers to be available to help the kids that need the help. So this wouldn't work otherwise. So in September, when I figured that's what was being expected, I said, we can't do that. That's not going to be helpful. Now I know what's going to be helpful, and it's this. It wouldn't work otherwise. If I have to use my teachers to have activities set up for all of the kids, it won't work.
I'm not opposed to the idea of the intervention, and you know, you clearly stated the need for it, and I'm sure that those gaps exist. I just, you know, having worked in schools where there is a block of time that's meant to be, everyone can go and do what they need to do, I think sometimes that freedom and the lack of a firm plan can sometimes be paralyzing, and what ends up happening is the path of least resistance is, you know, I'm not gonna, if I'm a staff member, I'm gonna tell these kids they need to come and see me, but if they don't show up, then they don't show up, and then, you know, I think sometimes if kids see an opportunity to you know, skirt something, not every kid, but a lot of kids are gonna take advantage of that. So I love the idea in theory. Logistically, I guess I have concerns about how it would play out.
Mrs. Gallivan, and then, but on that same point, perhaps, no, I don't doubt your earnestness and the need of this, but it just does seem quite cumbersome, and I would feel better if there was a way to maybe, not just find the right word, mandate, or you talk about your earnest desire to have that first half hour be students working with teachers, and perhaps we could assign, like, perhaps there is there is some sort of rubric that says, if you are at whatever level, if you're below a certain, if your teacher deems it, like, there is no, you're gonna go home for that last block, that you're expected to be at that whatever help session that is. I don't know, like, I'm struggling with the structure of it, as I think Ms. Denizio is, but I think if you could flesh that out better, I would feel better about it, although I am supportive of what you're doing. Mrs. Gallivan?
First of all, I think it's brave of you to come here with a plan that is sort of a plan in progress. And I think that you're right to be concerned about gaps. Like, we'd be putting our heads in the sand if we thought that no matter what grade it is, that there aren't kids who have really fallen behind, and to try to teach a high school subject without the foundation that they usually have, it makes it even harder, I think. I think I think we have to be careful to not be too micromanaging. I think that it's a good idea to give this a try. I think the key is how it gets presented to the students and the parents, as it's a tremendous opportunity, and there's a lot of responsibility being put on the student to be proactive about, asking for help and advocating for themselves if they need it. I think that somehow, and it's not that it has to come back to the school committee, but I think somehow you should be evaluating how many students are really taking advantage of help during this time. And if in fact it's not a large proportion, we may have to rethink whether it's the right thing to be doing or not. I think also, I think it should get evaluated from a teacher point of view. If there are an awful lot of teachers that don't have students coming to them, maybe they can be utilized in a different way. So, like I said, not coming to us, but hopefully you at the building will be evaluating it in that way. Couple of other things I wrote down. I'm thinking about the student who is behind. That student might be pulled in 2 or 3 or 4 directions. So if I'm that child's English teacher and I say, I need to see you on Wednesday, and Mark says, no, you need to come to my class, like somehow somebody's got to, and probably it should be the student to say, Mrs. Gallivan got to me first, so you have to work it out with her if you think it's a bigger problem. Because I could see, some of the kids that are behind in all their subjects. I was also thinking about, some kids might be interested, well, maybe not. Now that we do gym in every grade, maybe, I was gonna say, maybe some kids would be interested in like a fitness club for that time, or to go to the financial management seminars that we've been talking about but that's like after you get the basics going. I think the key is to lay this out to the students and the parents as, we're giving it a try. And, if we find that it is abused and not giving us the results that we want, maybe it'll be a try for 8 weeks, and that's that. But, I think that high school kids should be able to advocate for themselves, and if they're in a class where they know they need some extra help, and even if the teacher doesn't say, I'm gonna reteach long division tomorrow, they can come and initiate that too. But there are a lot of, I'm not saying Walpole, but just in this world right now, there are a lot of kids with gaps. So I think it's a good idea to try something.
Yeah.
Ms. Gayotis, then Ms. Denizio.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I love the idea. I think if you were presenting something like this at the middle school level where it didn't have a lot of structure, I'd be more concerned and share some of this concern. But these are children that are, mature, and they should be able to use the time in whatever way, whether it's a club and they have something that they needed to get done, whether it's extra help, whether it's, like you said, a student who's advanced that just wants to study for their test tomorrow. These kids were trying to get them ready for college and being independent, and I think it's great, and you're identifying gaps and came up with a plan, so I think it sounds like a great idea to me.
Your comment reminds me a little bit of, we had PSATs a few weeks ago, and one of the things we decided to do with the seniors, and I know that they're seniors, and there's a big difference between freshmen and seniors. But we said to the seniors, look, this is a day for you it's a college and career day, right? You go out and you want to visit a college, you want to work on your essay, you want to work on your application, you want to, whatever it is. The feedback was phenomenal from parents and students. Like, one parent said to me, Tuesday night, she said, we just thought, oh my God, thank God, we've got a day tomorrow. It's not a weekend day, it's a school day where you don't have to go to school, and now you can get caught up and you can get those things done. They genuinely, does everybody use it to their full advantage? Of course not. They're high school kids, but those are the kids that we will be able to direct to come, and they won't be able to leave. And if they leave, it'll be like skipping a class, because we know that they need help.
Ms. Denizio.
I just wondered if the hour-long block would need to be the last chunk of the day, or if it could be earlier?
Well, if it's earlier, then you're expecting everybody to come back if they do leave. So it's,
Yeah, or they don't leave, they just stay and work
Right.
somewhere on campus or
Right.
do something else on campus.
yeah, which again goes back to the point that now I've got to utilize my staff who I'm trying to get to work with kids to supervise everybody else who doesn't need those learning gaps filled.
Ms. Zarek?
I just want to say, as a parent of a high school student who doesn't always have a study hall, so doesn't always get chance for interventions or sometimes misses guidance opportunities, and doesn't always want to stay after school because it's a pain in the neck to figure out how to get home or do I get the car, I think it's phenomenal. Because I know he would take advantage of those sessions and this would be an easier way to do it, so I appreciate that.
I know it's out of the box thinking, and I know that it's not, it has, and this is why I said to Bridget and Bill, you know, look, this is not going to be what I think everybody thinks it's going to be, which is this X block, you know, and everybody's going to have something that they're going to. But it's too important for me. I mean, I wouldn't be here tonight if I didn't think it was important. It's too important to be able to carve out this time outside of class time, outside of the scheduled class time, to give everybody this opportunity to work with kids and kids to work with their teachers. I think it's worth a shot. You know, I hope that you support it at least to the point that we can see how it does work. And I'm with you, Nancy, as far as this doesn't work, we're going right back. You know, I mean, why would we want to continue it if it doesn't?
Yeah, I think it just builds in a little bit of, oh, I'm sorry.
No, please.
A little
Please
bit
go.
of accountability of, you know, we're trusting, and, I mean, I have a great track record. You're not a brand-new principal who has a Yahoo idea. I think we should give it a try, but I think that we should try to build in as much accountability as possible. And, you know, if a parent wants to assign a kid because for some reason, you know, I think that should be allowed too. You know, if I know my kid is very irresponsible and I don't want that child to be able to leave the school.
We love getting those calls from parents. We have your permission? Okay, great. Noted.
I remember, I was wondering, as you were talking, I would assume that it's also a time if a kid needed to stay for detention, that would just fit right in there too.
It's actually on my list, but I didn't want to bring it up. I thought that might be a little too negative, but it is actually one of those times where, you know, kids do struggle to sometimes stay for a detention after school. They've got work, they've got, you know, I mean, I got kids who, you know, I had one parent in the other day and his daughter is working every single day, 6 days a week, and they can't survive and pay the rent unless she does, you know, and so here's a kid who, you know,
You need to find the time.
maybe you need to find the time to get your homework done so then you can go to Stop and Shop and do your shift, you know. I mean, I just, there are all sorts of reasons why I think it can be helpful. And not all of them are the same, you know.
Mr. Breen has a story.
No, I don't.
Oh, it looked like it.
I would think it would be a great opportunity for makeup work as well. Like you know, as the year, kids start off strong, that even really good kids start to miss things. And then there's avoidance, and they just think, if I missed that day of school, well, that day didn't happen. And maybe you could build up a culture of Wednesday is the day where you make up any tests or quizzes that you missed in the previous week, because staying after is very hard. Even kids that have the time will tell you they don't have the time because they just want to postpone it. So it seems like another opportunity there as well.
Yeah.
Seeing no further comments, thank you. Oh, Sean, sorry.
Just a quick comment. I love the idea. I think when communicating it, I don't know if you're comfortable making like a video or something, but there's a lot of information here And it seems like it might be tough to read in an email, but it just throwing it out there, like if you can screencastify yourself or something, if you want to throw up some slides, like just to make it easier to digest as a parent.
I was gonna try and get it out tomorrow on the e-notes, but I'll
Yeah.
see what I can
Well,
do
yeah,
between now and
I
then.
don't know, just throwing it out there
It's a little
might be an
podcast.
option, but I mean, I remember reading, at the very start of the year, there was those couple emails and, it was a rough,
Yeah.
it was a lot.
Yep.
A lot of text.
Steve, you don't need to always listen to us, by the way.
No, yeah. Just a comment. That's okay. Me least of all, it's okay.
Well, Principal Ambush, this is, at the end of the day, your purview. We're happy you came to us. We hope this is successful. We wish you well. Perhaps in 5 or 6 or 8 weeks, just let us know, and perhaps maybe we can find a time for you to report back, or at the budget hearing, you can just give us an update. We hope the update is it's going very well. But thank you for utilizing this opportunity to kind of publicly vet it first.
Thank you all.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for all your hard
Appreciate
work.
Yeah,
your time.
Thank you.
and the PLC stuff, we didn't even talk about, that's so important, so yay on that one.
Excellent. Moving on, school building project update. Dr. Goff, do you want to start? Mr. Breen, members of the school building committee?
I could start. Well, we had a successful town meeting.
We did.
The vote was 126 to 4, but we need to understand, though, that that doesn't mean 126 town meeting members are going to vote for the school. They recognized an obligation to support the will of people in November, right? So we allocated the money at town meeting pending approval on the November ballot question, which is an important thing. I think a lot of people might have gotten the impression that there's this overwhelming support for the school, that we don't know if it's there or not. So just that caveat, but I was still encouraged by the town meeting, the tenor of the conversation, and the vote.
Yeah, and I'd also like to thank all the RTMs and the community members that came out on the 19th. I think we had a really good showing, and I think that helped, and the information that we provided with them was helpful in order for them to make an informed decision that following Saturday. So I appreciated, people coming out and people taking the tours, and I thought that it was a good turnout.
Ms. Gayotis, sorry.
Yeah, building on what Mark said, town meeting members were elected. They're elected to listen to people. They fully vet information, read more than an average taxpayer would. So I would say that, even though we don't know how they're going to ultimately vote, it was very important that we had such overwhelming support, because these are people who spent a lot of time going over information. So for me, that just goes to show that they were realizing that we've done a lot of work to get here. They probably read a lot of the presentations, digested a lot of the information, and realized that what we were presenting was very cost-effective and a really good solution to this problem we're having in town that we've been looking at for, well, as long as I've been on school committee, the aging problem of the middle school. So for me, I thought it was a wonderful endorsement of all of the hard work we've done, and I really suggest that, anybody who still has questions, reach out, read the information that's online. This is such an important vote, and we've spent years and years on this, and the information's out there, so it does dishearten me a bit when people are still posting that they don't know where to get information. There's websites. Read, get informed, and reach out if you still don't understand. Tons of information on finances, tons of information on, the MSBA process, how we fully vetted it with the state, who's an expert on the matter, as opposed to other people in town who are construction experts but don't actually have credentials from the state like the MSBA does. They would not have allowed us into the program if there wasn't a need. That's important to remember. It's not school committee members saying there's a need. It's an actual agency who does this and takes it very seriously and looks at competing needs across the entire state. And they said Walpole has a need. They let us in after 3 separate tries, and we got into the program by, they looked at other schools and said, Walpole has a need. So to me, that's really important to remember, and I just suggest everyone research before you make your decision, because there's a lot of information out there. But we need everybody out there voting on November 2nd. So thank you.
Mrs. Gallivan and then Mr. Denizio.
Yeah, that's what I just wanted to point out. What we're talking about is our last school committee meeting before the voters will decide the fate of this project next Tuesday at the ballot. If people, so people can vote on Tuesday from 8 to 8. They can also vote for tomorrow from 9 to 11 is the only other time to vote, other than on Tuesday. I think that, as people have already said, there's a great deal of information. You can find it on the school website, or you could find it on the town website, among many other places. The process that we used has secured $37 million of state funding to help pay for this project, and that's an important consideration also. As Jen was just saying, the funding at the state level is very competitive. One of the town meeting members the other day compared it to being more competitive than getting into some of the competitive colleges. So it shows you that that it's a long process, it's a well-vetted process, and it will get decided next Tuesday by the people of Walpole. So just wanted to be super clear that everybody knows that this isn't decided until the vote happens next Tuesday, November 2nd.
Ms. Denizio.
This project, represents a very big investment in the community, and I think most voters understand the magnitude of the investment, and because of it, they have a lot of questions, and rightfully so. They want to know, all of the ins and outs. They want to know everything's vetted, like Jen was saying. They want to know that there's been a process that's been followed with fidelity and that there are constraints around it. And I would just say that there is an answer to every question about this project. I've attended multiple community forums, and I've read a lot of documents, and I've never had a question come up where the project team said, oh, we're not sure. Oh, we haven't thought about that yet. Oh, that's to be determined. Every question has an answer. And sometimes the answer is, to find the answer, we'll go through this process, right? That answer hasn't been determined, but we know the process we have to follow. So if you do have a question still, before you cast your vote, please ask it, I would say. Reach out to the project team, reach out to the school committee. You can send an email, you can contact the superintendent's office. Reach out, ask the question. Don't be afraid, because I guarantee you there is an answer, and that answer is going to inform you and help you cast your ballot in an informed, responsible way. So I would just add that on.
Further questions, comments, or statements? Well, this is sort of a watershed moment for us on this committee. My 10 years and Jen's, and Nancy's a little more than that. We've been talking about this project, and I just want to express a sense of gratitude for all the work that has been done and how heavily we've vetted this project. I know Dr. Goff is very excited to get to Wednesday, and some of our colleagues on the school building committee are very excited to get to Wednesday. But I think there's just as Ms. Denizio said, there is an answer for every question. I think one thing just stuck in my head, because I think there was a question about the MSBA that was circulating a lot today in the past few days, and that $37 million of state money is in part our money as well. Every time you go to Cumbies, every time you go to Rockies and you pay sales tax, a penny of that, it goes to this fund, and so the community has such a great opportunity to actualize that fund that is so, as Jen said, so heavily managed and must go to this project. That's, I think, something important to underscore. But we are at the end of the line for us and our official duties as a committee, so there's really nothing else to say on the matter. We just hope we will continue to allow people avenues to become informed through our communications and the town websites, and ask that they do so, and we trust in our neighbors. Anything further? Moving on, Dr. Goff.
All right, I'll give you the COVID update. Consistent with the authority provided by the board, and after consulting with medical experts and state officials, The commissioner is extending the mask requirement through at least January 15th. So that's been moved, if you remember, it was November. And now it's January 15th. The Department of Education will continue to work with medical experts and state health officials to evaluate the mask requirement beyond January 15th. In terms of the vaccination update, the middle schools, there has not been change. There's been very little change. They're still at, it went from a 42% vaccination rate to a 42.8. So it's still for Bird. And Johnson went from a 70.7 to a 71.3. So for grade 8. So they're still at a 45%. There really is no change at the middle schools. Walpole High School, their vaccination rate is 77.3%. That's up from 74.6% when we last reported. So it is an increase, but it's not 80% yet. So we just have to remember that if or when we do reach that, that's when the vote would need to come, whether to make it mask optional. There has been, just to give you some feedback, some questions, just as some things that are being discussed, that, you know, if we do get to the 80%, you know, how does the staff, you know, police unvaccinated students, you know, those who don't wear a mask, and how the district would go about doing so, because DESE leaves that up to the individual districts of how they're going to manage that. So it's also important to remember, and this is from Mrs. Garvin, that if or when schools go mask optional for vaccinated students, just to remember that unvaccinated students within 6 feet, they would be deemed close contacts, and they would need to stay in quarantine, because test and stay is for masked students only. Both students would need to be masked in order for that to work. So just our responses to the close contact. So if we remember, the definition doesn't change, how we respond to it is something that can be changed, but the definition doesn't change. It looks like Walpole, the town of Walpole, their positivity rate was 1.6%, so good news, that was trending down a bit from the last time. In the schools, total positive cases for the last 2 months for September and October is 42. We still have another day left, so we'll get that updated. We did have 2 cases last week. That was down. If you remember, we had 8 the week prior, and then 11 the week prior than that. So we saw a little bit of a downtick, which is good. Concerning flu clinic, I know that you were wondering if we could have a flu clinic for our high school students. So there was that survey that was sent to the high school families twice regarding a vaccine. And 18 families said they were interested in having the child vaccinated. 6 weren't sure, and 24 said that they were not planning to have their child vaccinated. Approximately 384 indicated that their children have already been vaccinated. So with that, Trish Fisher from the Walpole Health Department, she was able to secure 30 doses, so we will be able to have a COVID clinic for our Walpole High School students. And that will take place in November, and it's going to be that Wednesday before Veterans Day. So I think that's the 10th. And then that way, at least if there's, you know, with that first dose, if they have you know, if they're not feeling well, then they'll have that time. And that'll be from 12 to 2 in the large conference rooms, and families will pre-register. So Stephen Imbush will get that out in his e-notes. If there are doses still available, the high school nurses will then reach out to those students who already have their first dose to see if they want to get their second dose at the school. So they'll do that. And once vaccines become available for younger students, then we'll be able to hopefully host another clinic. So I do want to thank Trish Fisher and the health department for helping us out with that. Just one of the Q&As that have popped up that have asked that as the holidays approach, can schools require a negative COVID test prior to students' return to school? And the answer is no. Testing cannot be required for a student's return to school after holidays or vacations, but they are encouraged to follow the recommended travel guidelines. And I'll put that in so people can be able to access that. And another thing to note too is that with our school nurses, that they don't have the authority to decide which COVID test to accept. It's something they don't, they have to follow the state. So that at-home tests aren't accepted by DPH, so that's why they're not entered into the Maven. So they have to go by what the state tells them to do. So that, I think, is up for COVID. Any COVID questions? And Kathy will be back the next time in November, because just in case we get closer to that 80%. I just want to thank the town administration and the Walpole Police Department and high school administration for their communication. Typically, we have more notice during a weather event, so that when a tree comes down on Common Street, along with some power lines near the high school, close to opening, and then you don't have much time, and with the messenger system down, it's really important to have the town and the school departments and the police department working together. And fortunately, we were able to use all the social media we had available to get this information out. Obviously, if it impacted more than the high school in communication with the police department, they would have sent out with their communication system. The whole town would have got it, but at least it would have hit, if it had to impact our middle and our elementary schools. Fortunately, we were able to keep our middle and elementary schools in session, and we were able to hold parent-teacher conferences, so that was good. We talked about the middle school building project. I just want to end with just a comment about the Langley Foundation, because Bill Hahn and I met with Mr. and Mrs. Langley prior to the opening of school. There's just such a wonderful family, and we discussed the John D. Langley Foundation with our leadership council. And I just want to make school committee and the public aware of this foundation, because I just assume it's been quite a while, so I think I take it for granted that everybody knows about this foundation. And really, the primary mission is to fund requests for extracurricular and enrichment opportunities for children and teens with financial need or families in crisis. And they partner with the Walpole Public Schools in order that our school personnel can identify a particular child's needs, and then to serve to promote the social and emotional well-being of a child or a family in need. And all of our grants are funded through fundraising events. And for those of you who may not know, John Langley, he was a college sociology and business major, and he was also involved in urban community service, and he was interested in social work. And he attended Walpole High School, and he was involved in, I can't even get into the multitude of activities that he was involved in. I think everybody knew John. And he was a high school student leader, and among the many leadership positions he held, he was a student representative to the school committee. So I think that's why it's appropriate to let you know about him. And more important than his many accomplishments, and I'm just quoting from the foundation, that John has been described by many as an exemplary human being who is kind, caring, sensitive, and beyond his years. And John's friend wrote, quote, "If there were 6 billion John Langleys on this earth, there would not be a single problem except how to contain the overwhelming happiness." So I just wanted to make you aware of this foundation and the Langley family, because we are so thankful for their partnership and what they've been able to do for our children and what they'll continue to do. So
Thank you, Dr. Goff. John was a great guy, and it's so wonderful. I think we talked about them maybe a year and a half ago. It's so wonderful to see that in his name,
Yeah.
good things continue to happen in the Walpole Public Schools. Other questions or comments for Dr. Goff? Mr. Ahern?
Yeah, just I guess 2 comments just about the high school closure. The first is, past practice dictated a call, but that was an inaccessible mode of communication. And just if there is a mode of communication that becomes unavailable in the future, it might be helpful to share that. Like whether it was known in the first email when the 2-hour delay went out, like we can't use our call system, please refer to email or Facebook and just give people a place to look. And the second, Walpole High School wasn't the only place that incurred damage. We definitely had families around the district, and it was a chaotic morning. And there was, an apology for the inconvenience at the last line of the last email that was sent out. But I just think it just shows additional care to our families to recognize that there was an inconvenience, the multiple different emails, the change in schedule, not knowing where to look for the information, there was confusion, and just, leading with that. Just leading with saying, I'm sorry, this has been a crazy morning. I understand, it's probably crazy for you. We're sorry about that, and,
I comment on that. Thank you, Sean. Yeah, in the time and in the heat of the moment, when you have less than 2 hours to try to figure out to call, and your system goes down because the beyond your control, even after you've tested it. But the company had readily admitted that, and that's something on a side that I will be, if any of you know me, I will be contacting the provider this weekend. But when you do that and you're trying to also do other things right after you send that out, that email, yes, was secondary. The priority is trying to make sure that we had to cancel the high school, among other things that were going on at that time. But the explanation was there as best as it could be done. And at that point, and I have to be candid, I can't lead with an apology. I have to think about what needs to be done and then apologize for the convenience. I think that's getting into a little bit in the weeds. I understand what you're saying, and I think next time in that situation, I don't think there's going to be that situation, because if it was ever a mass emergency, we would use the Walpole Police Department. But in terms of having the 2-hour delay, that email couldn't go out at that point, because we had to determine what was happening, live wires that was down, communicating with the police chief, communicating with the town administrator, communicating with Stephen and Bush, communicating with some parent phone calls that were coming in. And then, after we could safely say, we have to call the school, looking at if barriers could be moved, that was a possibility. When we determined that, then the email could be crafted as best as could be to be able to get people home. Fortunately, we weren't like, another town that the students were on the bus and were on the way there, and the tree fell, and they had to turn everybody around, and they had the phone call system, but it was chaotic, because as the dispatch was coming through, people were coming home. It was just a really tough, Mother Nature, took its course, unfortunately.
No, I wasn't inferring that the apology would go, the first 2 emails, just as you said, the priority is information. But the final email that went out, well after the school had been canceled, just notifying that there was an issue, the fact that the district chose to lead with, there's an issue with our phone system, and then apologizing for the inconvenience seems a little disingenuous to me. At that point, if we are going to comment, the system failed, we made do, we are sorry.
Right. Well, you could be sure I was not disingenuous.
I don't think any of us would infer that you are, Ms. Gaotitz, and then Mrs. Gallivan.
I just wanted to say that I don't think Sean is speaking on behalf of the entire committee. This was an emergency circumstance. It was, as someone who's been working storm duty for 2 days with live wires and things, your priority is the safety of the kids, and you are in an emergency situation, so I think that you did a wonderful job, and I wanted to say thank you.
Welcome.
Mrs. Gallivan.
Same here. I think that respectfully, I just completely disagree with the criticism.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like criticism, and I think that there were a lot of decisions that needed to be made in a very short period of time, and I think they were done wonderfully. I think that, as far as the committee goes, I think we couldn't have asked anything more of you. So, just wanted to go on record for that.
And my apologies if it seemed like it was being disingenuous, that was not the intent. the intent was to try to get something out while other things were happening simultaneously, because if not, it could have happened at the end of the school day, and that's what I did not want to happen.
And I think it's well said that in running a whole district, you probably got up at 3 o'clock in the morning.
4 a.m.
In anticipation of things like this. And I don't necessarily know that many of your colleagues do the same in other districts with that level of preparedness.
And the only
so.
reason I knew is I was driving around town, checking out the
Yeah.
schools. And that's no fault of the town administration or anybody, because the tree just happened to fall right before I was, just about to go up to the school. And then I had to backtrack and sit in traffic coming back and made the necessary phone calls. But, I don't know if I want to say it was fortunate that I was driving right before the power
As long as you're not under it. We can't have you under them. Moving on. Subcommittee activity? I have something under legislative, if anyone else does. Seeing none. Just to be aware, perhaps for committee planning purposes, it looks like November the 19th will be a fairly substantial meeting as we have our MCAS report, but there is a need to really kind of dig in and discuss as a committee the American Rescue Plan Act funding. So this ties into the legislative subcommittee report because to very briefly go to 1,000 feet, $8.7 billion is coming to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, $5.3 billion of that in the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds. The House is taking up a spending bill around that $5.3 billion this evening. Mike Frischert, just as he did with the CARES Act funding and the ESSER funding, has been dialoguing with the town side as far as in the weeds, looking at ductwork, looking at the physical plants of all of our 8 school buildings, to kind of create a list of priority needs. There was a need identified at the high school, probably a week or so ago. Jim Johnson had been aware of that, and so when he dialogued with our legislators, he highlighted that. So Rep. Rogers has filed a $350,000 amendment to the spending bill for that piece that's currently, the HVAC at the high school, that's currently being discussed. There's, I believe, Rep. Rogers filed about 4 or 5 Walpole-specific bills. I just happened to be waving at cars this afternoon with Selectman O'Neill, and we were discussing this as well, and he informed me, which was the first I'd heard of it, that the selectmen were going to have a very in-depth discussion at their Tuesday, November 16th meeting. So I think it would behoove us to kind of also have a discussion on November the 18th. So Walpole, as we, all 7 of us who are town meeting members had heard, is receiving over a 2-year period in 2 tranches, $7.7 million. So that's a tremendous amount of money. It is by statute, the general law indicates that grants of this nature that are federal are spent by the select board. They have the final say, but I've kind of dialogued with the majority of the board now, just really urging them to work collaboratively in their decision. Some communities have done task forces to kind of see where the needs are. I know we've been dialoguing along the way, but it in my view, seems to be, in light of the fact that the legislature is looking at their portion now of money, totally distinct from the $7.7 million we have to decide as a community what to do with. It would just behoove us to kind of have Mike come in, who I know has been really going through the bill and seeing what is eligible for funding and looking at our projects. It's not just kind of a blank check. It's very targeted around infrastructure, public health, response to the pandemic. So the good news is this particular legislative funding stream is a 4-year stream. And so I think, as Town Manager Johnson said at town meeting this Saturday, there's a desire to kind of pump the brakes. We have a tremendous amount of time. Half of the funds aren't even going to be available to us until next year. So it kind of affords us a great opportunity to really dialogue, to really be deliberative. But obviously, knowing my 7 colleagues as I do, I think we all have strong opinions about the needs of the Walpole Public Schools and want to make sure that we are at the table, even if we have to bring chairs ourselves, which I don't think we do in this case. But I just wanted to kind of telegraph, number one, that there is a pretty sizable earmark that relates to us, being debated today, tomorrow, perhaps into Monday, in the legislature and the House for the high school's HVAC. And we're probably going to need to carve out some serious time at the next meeting I'll have Mike and work with him to kind of go soup to nuts and maybe a 5 or 10 minute presentation of just what is this funding, how does it affect the public schools, and what we should be doing, and kind of building some consensus on how we want to advocate together. And we'll probably have a report by then about what the selectmen are doing, but the telegraphing is they have some kind of very priority, small dollar projects, but the preponderance of those funds are really not up in the air, but being very deliberatively looked at. So this is just another piece that kind of intersects with the school department. Dr. Goff?
I think it's important that you noted, it's very specific of what you need to spend it on.
Exactly.
So have they mentioned yet exactly, have they come up with those guidelines?
Yeah, so there's 151, as people know, I do work for Norfolk County, who has 2/3 of Walpole's 7.7 million is coming to the county first, and a program we're doing to disperse that, just by the nature of the way the bill was written. So there's about 6 buckets. It's responding to public health, economic development, infrastructure, specifically sewer, water, and broadband. But in general, many districts around, from what I've been following, are doing things like HVAC quite safe to fall within the guidelines, things of that nature. There have been, there is a path to do things that address student, like the gaps in core retention, like we heard Stephen talking about. Holliston, for example, is doing full-day kindergarten fully with this money, which it's obviously one-time money. They're kind of making a stretch that because there were gaps with the online learning, they need to have kids in school full-time as kindergartners. Obviously, they're applying this money now, so they may, if there's any federal clawback for that, they could be a canary in the coal mine for us. So that's something that I'm following incredibly closely. One of my colleagues is a Holliston selectman, so had kind of shared that with me. So I think there's, for us, what I want to do is we're assembling now with Mr. Frisha just a lot of material and hopefully some streamlined material for the committee to be able to get that to you in your packets so we can all kind of bring ourselves up to speed after we get by Tuesday. But this is, I think, something that's going to be part of the public dialogue and really intersecting with school funding for probably the next half a decade at the least. Mrs. Gallivan?
Just 2 things. You talked about 150-page regulations. Can you get us the executive summary? Because
yes,
like I would like to understand this better before we talk about it. And ideally, can you ask Mike Frisha to get us the information the weekend before?
Yes, and
November 16th, because it's going to be useful to talk to the select board before they dig in and say, these are decisions.
So quite right. So what I can do now is probably tomorrow when I get to work, I'll put together this. The Secretary of Administration and Finance is like a really great 12-page PowerPoint that really kind of breaks down where the areas are, and there are there's a section summary that's about 15 pages as well. Really, there's kind of buckets that will be there's a curriculum and learning gap bucket, and there's a sort of school infrastructure bucket, and that's sort of where we should be focusing putting our focus on. But again, it's a lot of money. It's we got to do some due diligence on that. All right. No further questions on that. Citizens' comments. Patrick, nothing? Okay. Approval of warrants, donations, and minutes. We have no donations today, but would someone like to take warrants? Sean?
Yes, I would. I'd like to make a motion to approve the following expense warrants for the amounts listed in your packet. Those warrants are 222016 and 222017.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Ahern, second by Ms. Denizio. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstained? 700. This is a great spot for a quick roll call vote. Next.
Also, I'd like to make a motion to approve the following payroll warrant for the amount listed in your packet. The number is 2216PA.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Hearn, second by Ms. Denizio. All those in favor? Opposed, abstained, 700. There were no gifts. Ms. Sarah, would you like to take minutes?
Sure. I'd like to make a motion to approve the October 14th, 2021 school committee meeting minutes.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Sarek, second by Ms. Denizio. All those in favor? Opposed, abstained, 700.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Green, second by Ms. Gaotitz. All those in favor? Opposed, abstained, 700. Have a very good night, everyone.
Does she need to sign
We just need 5.